What's up guys, welcome back. My name is Matthew Kaufman and this is Matt's Millennial Money. If you're familiar with my channel and you've been following, I bought a real estate property, a rental property about 1 year ago. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe of course to follow along. Since it's been 1 year, I figured it'd be interesting to recall and look back at my experiences of being a landlord and owning a rental property. What I'm going to talk about is what I did right, what I did wrong, and some tips and tricks to help you so you don't make the same mistakes that I might have made in the process. To start off, right at the beginning, it involved the purchasing of the house and acquiring a loan. I put down 20% of the total purchase of the property and secured a 20-year fixed-rate mortgage. Currently, I'm considering refinancing the property, but from the beginning, I wish I had started with a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage loan. My whole reasoning for this is that my goal is to continue buying rental properties and grow a portfolio. The shorter your mortgage loan length is, the more money you're going to pay per month for the property. I'm currently paying right about $1,275 per month for a 20-year fixed-rate mortgage. If I had, from the beginning, started with a 30-year fixed rate, I would have been paying less per month, which would have left me more money to then reinvest into my current property, as well as new properties. If I would have started with a 30-year mortgage, likely my monthly payment would have been minimum $100 to $200 less than what I'm currently paying. This means I could have taken that money and put it somewhere else, such as a down payment for a new property. I was listening to a podcast about real estate a couple weeks ago, and this one guy said it perfectly. He said, the end goal is not to pay off your property as fast as possible. Your end goal is to have as much money left over at the end of every single month from cash flow to then reinvest into more properties, which would result in more cash flow. It should be a never-ending cycle if your plan is to own multiple properties. So that right there is something that I definitely could have done better from the beginning. And like I said, I'm still considering refinancing, so we'll see where that goes. When it came to buying my property, it was kind of a funny situation because I originally looked at the property and put an offer in, which eventually was outbid by another person. The owner of the property accepted this person's offer, and I figured at that point it was time to continue looking for other properties. About 2 months later, I received a call from that realtor on the property, and he told me that the property was back in the market. And this is because the person whose offer was accepted a couple days before the closing, their loan fell through and they lost the opportunity to buy the house. So at that point, I put my offer in again. This time it was actually $10,000 less than what I had previously offered the first time. The realtor said I should probably offer higher because he wouldn't expect the owner to actually accept that offer because he thought it was too low. But for me, I had a specific number I was willing to pay and I was not willing to go above that. And lo and behold, the owner accepted my offer and we moved on to the closing of the property. And for this, moral of the story is have a specific number that you're willing to pay and don't go above that just because someone else says you should. Because after the calculations I did on the property, I knew that at what point I would be making money and at what point I would be losing money. Making money on real estate is made at the purchase, not the sale. Meaning the money that you'll make is due to the purchase price when you buy the property, not when you decide to eventually sell the property. After securing ownership of the property, the next step was to do any necessary renovations to get paying renters as tenants living in the property. This is something I think I did really well, and I thank my parents for all the help that they gave me when it came to everything from painting to taking doors down, taking walls down, redoing the tiles in the kitchen, landscaping, any of the yard work. The tough part about the timing of buying a property leading straight into the summer, and this property does not have AC. So we were simply surviving off fans throughout the entire renovations. When renovating a property for tenants to live in, your goal is not to make it as pretty as possible and expensive looking as possible. You want the unit to look as clean and functional as possible. The majority of reason for your rental price is more based on location of the property, not necessarily the property itself. A tenant's not going to know the difference whether you spent $1 per tile in the kitchen versus $10 per tile in the kitchen. Always consider how much you're spending on the property to make it look nice versus how much you can actually make back in cash flow through the tenant's rent. I think we did an excellent job because during the month of June, I did not owe a mortgage payment at all. And my first tenant moved in at the end of June. And this means that I never lost money on mortgage payments because my tenant's rent covered all the necessary expenses for that month. And luckily at the beginning of August, my second tenant moved in, which at that point gave me cash flow on the property. Number one tip I would give is to make the rents the priority because the rent is your revenue for the property. It's a business. My current tenants for the past year, luckily, have both been very good at always paying the rent. Sometimes it's been, a couple days late, but as long as I get paid in a timely manner, that's fine. One thing I would always recommend in your lease agreement is to make sure you have something mentioning a late fee. I personally, in my lease agreement with my tenants, it says that the monthly rent must be paid by the 10th and no later than that. And if paid later than that, there's a $50 late fee. I'm happy to say I've not had to charge any of my tenants a late fee thus far. Usually if I have not been paid by the 5th of the month, I'll send them a message recommending them to pay the rents. And usually they're pretty quick to pay at that point. I feel as a landlord, you should be able to keep your tenants as happy as possible and avoid conflict if possible. Obviously, when money is involved, it can be difficult to avoid conflict completely, but I feel you should do your best. Generally, when I see my tenants in person, I try to be as cordial as possible, as friendly as possible, and maintain that landlord-tenant relationship. Sometimes once the relationship crosses into friendship, it can be difficult to speak about money with them for obvious reasons, of course. One of the most important things when it comes to finding the right tenant is to screen your tenants properly. For me, an important rule I live by with screening tenants regarding their credit score is I do not generally consider someone under a 600 credit score a reliable candidate. Somebody with excellent credit is 750 and above, good credit 700 to 749, fair credit 650 to 699, poor credit 600 to 649, and bad credit is anything below 600. Next up are going to be 5 tips when it comes to screening tenants that I've kind of learned along the way. Number 1 is going to be set your requirements. This is going to include income, landlord and employment references, credit history, evictions, and criminal history. Number 2 is going to be do an initial screening. You need to set expectations with the rental ad. Disclose any necessary information in the body of the advertisement. This will help you initially screen renters at the same time. An example of this, if the closets in your unit are small, make sure to specify that. Be sure to speak on the phone to screen the tenants before even showing them the property. This is going to help you avoid wasting time showing a tenant the space if they're not even interested in from the beginning. Number 3, create a rental application. Always use the same application form for every prospective tenant. This will help you evaluate tenants and keep everything in compliance with fair housing laws. I'd recommend making sure you have a place for your signature and theirs, of course, and make sure you retain your copies to protect yourself in the case of future law dispute. Number 4, of course, screen your tenants. Be sure to screen your tenants regarding credit, criminal convictions, evictions, and anything else that stands out to you. Number 5, make a decision. As an independent landlord, you have the ability to be flexible, but what I would recommend is not rush the process. It's a lot better to go 1 month without rent coming in compared to dealing with an awful tenant for 1 full year after papers are fully signed. Before tenants move in and you give them the keys, you have to make sure the lease agreement is fully signed and of course agreed upon. You have the first and potentially last month's rent, and the security deposit check is in hand. With my tenants, I made them give 1.5 months rent for the security deposit. For anyone that's confused what the security deposit is, this is not the money that you just get to spend on whatever you want. This is money that's deposited into a savings account and it stays there until the tenant eventually moves out. When the tenant's lease is up, it's your responsibility as a landlord to do a walkthrough of the actual unit. The reason for this is to confirm that there's no physical damage. And this damage could include things such as holes in the wall, damaged doors, broken windows, any renovations that the tenants might have done themselves, which hopefully be stated in your lease agreement that they can't do that. And lastly, anything that just doesn't look the same when you hand in them the keys to move in day 1. The purpose of the security deposit is to cover all the expenses for anything that you might have to fix because they damaged it in the process of living there. I myself, before my tenants moved in, I made sure to take full video evidence on my phone or whatever we got. And the reason for this is to know the exact way the apartment looked day 1 compared to the last day when they moved out. And at that point, you decide whether you want to give them back the full security deposit or not. As a landlord, you have to be honest of what will cost you money and what's not going to. Because I own only 1 property and I house hack at my property, meaning I live in 1 unit while the rents my tenants pay to live there pays for all my property expenses. And for this reason, I don't really feel the need to waste money by outsourcing basic landscaping such as mowing the lawn, when it's warm outside, and on the other hand, when it's cold outside, for snow removal. This past winter was actually kind of an odd situation because we had no large snowstorms, which luckily made me not have to use a snowblower at all. Everything that we had was just a small dusting, which I, within 15 minutes, could just shovel by hand, which I did. One thing I did learn throughout the year about my property was that the previous owner did the bare minimum when it came to necessary fixes, such as proper installation, electrical, plumbing, and as well as many other things, of course. And when these things did pop up, luckily my dad and I were able to fix these ourselves, and once again, did not have to outsource and pay somebody else to do it. That right there would probably be one of my biggest tips. If you could do something yourself, do it yourself. The goal of owning a rental property is cash flow, making money. Spending money on small things, which will eventually add up, and soon, without realizing, you just spent $1,000 on something that maybe you could have done yourself. Throughout the year, I was lucky enough to only have 2 major things go wrong with the property. One was regarding heat for one of the units, which went out, and the other was the hot water for that same unit just a couple weeks after. Luckily, the guy that had come to repair the first issue was actually able to fix the second issue as well, and he gave me a pretty good deal. He gave me a quote, which I'm guessing probably saved me a bit of money, and overall cost was about $850 total, which I thought in general was a pretty fair price. Next up, I want to share just 3 important things that I learned in my first year owning a rental property. Number 1, reserves are very important. Reserves, meaning the money that you have stored in the bank, is crucial. The reason for this is that you don't know when something is going to go wrong within a second. This could be electrical, plumbing, a leak in the roof, The shower overflowed and flooded the bathroom, along with other things. Repairs cost money, so you need to be prepared. If you've seen any of my videos I've spoken about during the first year of owning my property, I have not personally pocketed any money for my personal use. All the money that I've made has gone straight into the bank, and it's sitting there, which will likely go toward either replacing the roof as well as maybe my next real estate investment. To play it safe, I would recommend being conservative, meaning keeping about 3 to 6 months worth of rental income per property in reserves as a base. Also, I'd recommend following just like general advice, try to save 1 to 2% of the purchase price of the inevitable expenses and of course tenant turnover too. Number 2 is going to be stay on top of your accounting and books. When owning a rental property, you have to realize that you're a business owner, a CEO, so to speak. I'd recommend documenting everything, meaning keeping all receipts related to the property, and if you can, digitize them, meaning put them on a computer in some way to also have that resource. I'd recommend reviewing your income and expenses on a consistent basis, maybe once a month, once every 2 months, just to make sure you're staying on top of things. When it came to my property, for the first thing I did was open a separate bank account from my personal account, and doing this allowed me to keep a clear line of what was my personal money and what was money from the rental income as well as expenses from the property. Doing this will save you a lot of time during tax time, of course. One thing I would recommend is having a mentor of some kind or somebody that is familiar with rental properties or just real estate in general. Luckily, from the beginning of the process, when I was first looking and eventually bought my house, a good friend of mine's stepfather, who is a real estate owner, investor, and realtor, who's of course very familiar with the process, was very willing and able to help me, which I was very grateful for. Bottom line is you're in charge of your success. Your successes are on you, and your failures are on you too, which are even more important. Last one, number 3, there's going to be a huge mental shift when owning a property. There's without a doubt a mental shift that occurs through the investment journey, something I was not expecting. The biggest one is balance. At first, it was simply just the learning stage, but then came balancing emotions and business together. When it came to first buying the property, you have to avoid getting emotional, because if you do that, you're going to jump at the first one that you see, which might not be a good fit, especially financially. As I mentioned multiple times previously, I'm a first-time rental property owner and investor, meaning there was a huge learning curve when this all began, and I slowly have been learning more and more, and of course I still have so much more to learn. Looking back on this entire experience, I definitely learned what to do, what not to do, which unfortunately is an even bigger list, and how important it is to stay ahead of the issues with the property. I would highly recommend surrounding yourself with people who are supportive of you and also familiar with owning a property. For me, like I said, that was my parents, as well as I mentioned before, my friend's stepfather. Overall, I hope this has been informational and educational, and I hope if you're looking to buy your first property, that you take some of these steps that I've given you today and hopefully apply them for better practice. And if you are, best of luck in your next investment. That right there is going to wrap it up, guys. I want to thank you so much for watching. My name is Matthew Kaufman. This is Matt's Millennium Money. And if you're new to the channel, of course, please consider subscribing, hit that like button, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.